In 1836, the Republic of Texas was formed. As we talked about last time, Santa Anna, after being defeated at the Battle of San Jacinto, sat down with Sam Houston, and he's going to sign these Treaties of Alaska. The treaties basically recognize Texas as an independent country up to this Rio Grande River. Again, this is an area that never traditionally been considered part of Texas during the Spanish or Mexican period. So Texas all the way up to this Rio Grande River. Within this area, there's about 30,000 Anglo-Americans or people from the United States, about 5,000 enslaved Africans, and 4,000 or so Tejanos that are within this Republic of Texas. Well, as the people within the Republic of Texas are going to quickly discover, soon after Santa Anna left, so after signing the Treaties of Alaska, he went and talked with the United States President Andrew Jackson. We'll talk about him shortly. Then he returned to Mexican Congress under the condition, one of the Treaties of Alaska basically said that he would tell the Mexican Congress to recognize Texas as independent. Santa Anna will arrive in Mexico City, and he will not do that. As a matter of fact, he's going to say, I signed the Treaties of Alaska on duress, and as we're going to talk about, Mexico will refuse to recognize Texas as independent for a very long time. Not only is Mexico going to not recognize Texas as independent, nobody else will either. You just got independence technically in the Battle of San Jacinto on paper, but a lot of people are going to be looking at this new Republic of Texas. How long will this thing last? A lot of people say, this is just a rebellion. Mexico had put down previous rebellions before. We talked about the rebellion of Zacatecas. There have been rebellions in the Yucatan. It's just a matter of time, a lot of other countries thought, before Mexico comes up here and puts these Americans down for sure. So Britain's not going to offer their recognition. France isn't going to offer their recognition of this Republic of Texas. And even the United States President Andrew Jackson, even after talking with Santa Anna, and even though his buddy Sam Houston was instrumental in getting this Republic of Texas its independence, Andrew Jackson is going to be a little slow to recognize the Republic of Texas as independent. Part of this is going to be because 1836 is an election year in the United States. Andrew Jackson's not running, but one of his close allies, this Martin Van Buren guy that we'll talk about later, is running. And this Texas independence is a fairly controversial thing at the time. So Mexico's not recognizing independence. Other countries aren't recognizing Texas as independent. Not only that, but soon after the Battle of San Jacinto, you're going to have a lot of internal disputes within the Republic of Texas. A lot of people are going to be saying to Sam Houston, in order to ensure our independence, we should not just claim this area, maybe we should push forward and we can push down into Mexico, gain even more territory. There are going to be some people arguing that maybe we should go down here, raid these northern Mexican areas, and take loot and essentially use this to fund a bigger army, things like that. So there's going to be a lot of people arguing about, what do we do next? Is this war over? Should we continue to fight? Should we press the advantage? There are other internal disputes within Texas. One dispute is going to concern a number of the citizens within Texas, the Tejanos. As we've talked about before, 5,000 or so Tejanos, 4,000 or 5,000 Tejanos here, most concentrated around San Antonio, some of this Goliad area that used to be La Bahia, a handful over here in East Texas. Well, a lot of Tejanos were a little wary about the independence aspect of the Texas Revolution. Most Tejanos, well, a good chunk of Tejanos didn't have an opinion one way or another on the war against Santa Anna. A lot of people want to stay out of the fighting, still have memories of 1813, what happened back then. But a good chunk of the Tejanos that did, have skins in the game, a good chunk of them supported fighting Santa Anna, but a lot kind of hesitant about this independent republic thing. Again, a lot of people had seen as the Americans had moved in, they'd started to bring racism against Tejanos. A lot of people are worried now you have this Anglo-American majority. maybe they'll start oppressing us. And as evidence of this, immediately after the Battle of San Jacinto, a number of American Texans will go to San Antonio, fresh off, crying, remember the Alamo at the Battle of San Jacinto. A number of these Texans will see the people of San Antonio. Again, a number of the Tejanos in San Antonio didn't participate with the Mexican army, and a number actually fought with the Republic of Texas, or at that time just the people rebelling against Santa Anna. But some of these people don't know that. A lot of the people are newly arrived from the United States. Others are going to see Tejanos, and they don't see, nuance. They see Mexican, and you're going to see a lot of these start looting Tejanos in San Antonio. As we'll talk about, Sam Houston's going to step in and say, you guys don't do that. These guys are citizens as well. But there's still that are some that are incredibly wary about what is starting to happen here post-Battle of San Jacinto. So this is going to be an issue with the Tejanos. Now, there are some Tejanos that will be very supportive of what's happening. The Seguin family had supported fighting against Santa Anna. They were a little bit wary about independence for Texas, but after Texas is getting its independence, the Seguins are going to be on board. Juan Seguin, for example, will continue to fight in this newly formed Republic of Texas Army, and he's going to work closely with the new Republic of Texas government. So there's this issue of where do the Tejanos fit in here? And again, a lot of people within Texas, the American Texans, concerned Tejanos have these dual loyalties. Tejanos concerned that the American Texans will oppress them. So this is an issue that Texans are going to have to face, and the Tejanos in San Antonio will have to face as well. Another issue facing this new Republic of Texas is going to be the issue that's been facing the Spanish and was facing the Mexican government. It's going to be the presence of these Plains Indians, and in particular the Comanches, Apaches. But you also have groups like the Wichitas, Tonkawas, other groups we've talked about before. They're going to be, looking at this chaos, and some of these groups are going to take advantage of this chaos and start raiding again. There'd been a small period under Mexico where raids had slowed down, but we're going to talk about them picking up again shortly. How do we deal with them? Mexico had stationed troops here before. Republic of Texas, are you going to start placing the troops that you were using to fight Mexico to defend against these Indians? That's an issue. Another issue facing the Republic of Texas is debt. So in order to create the army that fought Santa Anna, you had a handful of militia, dudes just getting together, grabbing their gun, fighting the army of Mexico. But a lot of people had signed up for Sam Houston's professional army. Some had done so under promises of land. If we get independent, you can get X number of acres. But other people wanted money, and what Sam Houston and that cobbled together government at Washington on the Brazos had done is they gave out promissory notes, and they had given American merchants promissory notes for firearms, cannons, things like that. So in 1836, this new Republic of Texas, right when it's formed, is going to be $1.25 million in debt. That's obviously going to be a major issue. You add to that the things that had happened in the war. A number of homes have been destroyed. So as Santa Anna's armies are moving through here in February, in March, April, there's this runaway scrape. People are abandoning their homesteads. A lot of people, just essentially taking everything as they left. The Mexican army loots, takes things as it goes forward. Also is going to take it as it starts retreating back to Mexico. People's homes had been burned down. Slave owners, again, a good percentage of the American Texans are slave owners. A lot of slaves had actually fled during the chaos or gone back to Mexico with the Mexican army. Again, this is an opportunity for freedom for them. So the Republic of Texas has this public that needs to rebuild. Well, how the heck are these American Texans going to fix these things and deal with these problems? Well, what we'll see from April to September 1836 is essentially this government. And again, calling it a government from April to September 1836 is it's kind of a stretch. Basically, it had just been a number of prominent leaders who had gotten together. Again, in March 1836, they decided to declare independence. They started putting together sort of a haphazard government. Well, what we're going to have is this sort of, temporary government, I guess is what you would call it, put together some issues to be voted on by the residents of Texas. So September 1836, there's going to be an election, and the election will decide how this Republic of Texas should go forward. What's next? How do we deal with these problems? What do we do now that we're an independent republic, now that we're not a part of Mexico? Well, one of the issues on the ballot in this 1836 election, so they're just going to be setting up polling places at the various towns throughout Texas. One of the issues is going to be, now that we're independent, should we annex ourselves to the United States? And you got to think about this. The vast majority of American Texans are obviously from the United States. A vast majority of people here are from the United States. You have, again, 30,000 or so American Texans, again, 4,000 or 5,000 Tejanos, and about 5,000 or so African slaves. African slaves are not going to be allowed to vote, and as we'll talk about shortly, women will not be allowed to vote. But this is going to be put up to male voters in the Republic of Texas. Now, I should point out, it's not exactly going to be a professional election. Polling places won't be set up in certain areas. Like, as far as I know, San Antonio it doesn't participate in this vote. This is going to be just sort of a haphazard government putting together a last-minute vote, or I shouldn't say last-minute, a very poorly assembled vote. Well, in the September 1836 election, big issue is going to be, should we annex ourselves to the United States? Well, when this goes to the ballot, when the ballots are counted, there's going to be 3,277, so 3,277 in favor of abandoning the idea of an independent Republic of Texas and annexing this area to the United States. So 3,277 for immediate annexation and 91 against it. So that's 97% of Texans, and votes are pretty much being taking place in the American Texan part of this Texas area. 97% want to annex this area to the United States. So a lot of times you'll hear modern day people view this Republic of Texas as, the strong independent republic. Well, we're going to talk about in some ways maybe, but it's more we immediately want to join the United States. And this makes sense because the United States can help this Republic of Texas deal with its problems. If you get the U.S. Army in here, U.S. Army in the mid-1800s isn't anything great or anything compared to what it is in modern times, but it is a lot bigger than what this Republic of Texas has. U.S. Army, if it comes in here and adds Texas as a state or a territory, however they're going to do it, U.S. Army could set up forts. These forts can protect from Indians in Mexico a lot better than this cobbled together Republic of Texas Army. Also, just by adding the United States, being added to the United States, land value is going to go up tremendously. So if you're somebody here, you receive this huge land grant from Mexico, well, now this land's still yours, but you're now under the United States. You have U.S. protection. You got more land than you're going to use. You can probably break this land up, sell it to somebody here for significantly more than you bought it from Stephen F. Austin or whoever your colonizer was. So this is going to increase land values dramatically. Just adding to the United States will do that, okay? And then another reason you're going to see people vote for annexation is that most people just are familiar with the United States. When you move to a new area, a lot of times you'll see people try to replicate where they're from. And so a lot of these people from the United States want to get to as close to the United States as possible. Well, why not make ourselves part of the United States? We're familiar with it. So this is one of these issues that's going to be brought up in this 1836 election. Another issue is going to be, do these people, do the Texans approve of the Constitution that was cobbled together by this cobbled together government that was formed again in early 1836 once it was decided that Texas was independent. So basically what happened from April to September 1836 is this, again, cobbled together government wrote a constitution, and this is going to be this Constitution of the Republic of Texas. The Constitution that they wrote is going to be almost, well, I shouldn't say identical to the United States. It's going to be very, very close to the United States. So just like the U.S. Constitution, there's going to be an executive branch. So you have the U.S. President. Well, you'll have the President of the Republic of Texas, whereas the U.S. President serves for 4-year terms. The executive in the Republic of Texas will serve just 3-year terms. So the first president's actually only going to serve 2 years, but then after that, going forward, it's going to be every 3 years there'll be a new president. And after that 3 years, you're not going to be able to run in the next election. So whereas in the United States at this time, there's no term limits, anything like that, but the president gets elected 4 years, then they can serve a second term. Hypothetically, they could serve a third term. That can't happen in the Republic of Texas. You serve 2 years first president, then 3 years every president after that. So you serve your 3-year term. The next election you can't run. Now you can run 3 years after that, but you can't serve consecutive terms. So somewhat similar to the U.S. And again, this president will be able to execute things, commander of the military, and is going to put, carry out the laws passed by Congress. And this Congress is going to be, that the Constitutional Republic of Texas is going to set up, going to be very similar to the United States Congress in that it's going to have 2 houses, a Senate for an upper house, House of Representatives for a lower house. In order for a bill, tax, whatever, to go into law, it's got to pass through both houses first. Now, there's a couple differences in how the House of Representatives and the Senate are set up, but for the most part, it's similar to the way the U.S. government's set up. Same thing as far as the judicial branch, very similar to the United States court system, Supreme Court, things like that. Constitutional Republic of Texas is going to be very democratic. Now, the U.S. had become more democratic over time, although not a lot of the democratic principles are within the United States Constitution. They will be within the Republic of Texas. It's basically going to say, this is who can vote, this is how they vote, and the way that the votes are set up, it's going to be incredibly democratic. Again, U.S. at this time, there's still some states that don't allow people to elect their president directly. There's still a handful of states that, at least a couple states that put restrictions on who can vote based on property. Well, in the Republic of Texas, they're going to give universal male suffrage. I guess I shouldn't say universal male suffrage. Slaves won't be allowed to vote. Obviously, universal suffrage means women can't vote, but people of European and Mexican ancestry can vote. Indians, Africans, people with Indian ancestry, not Mexican, or not of Mexican ancestry. Obviously, people of Mexico have Indian ancestry, but unincorporated Indians, that's probably the best way to put it, and people with African ancestry cannot vote in Republic of Texas, but Mexicans and Tejanos and people of European American ancestry can vote, which is more democratic than a lot of states in the United States at the time. So 1836 election will ask, is this Constitution what you want? This will be approved. Now, there are going to be, again, issues with this Constitution. Oh, actually, couple other things about this. Constitutional Republic of Texas is going to have a few things that will differentiate it from the United States Constitution. One thing is going to be that it explicitly says future immigration from the United States will continue, and it doesn't put limits on this. Like, it says we'll take as many people from the United States as we can. This is pretty significant. It shows that obviously Americans are dominating Texas politics. They want more Americans to come in, and it sort of shows as a reaction to the law of April 6, 1830, and how Americans are responding now to have a limitation on immigration. Also, you can see this is a response to laws passed by Mexico. Republic of Texas in the Constitution will promise slaveholders protection for slaves. United States Constitution talks about slavery briefly, but it doesn't protect slavery. I mean, I guess it doesn't have to. It says right to property, things like that. But it's vague on slavery. It doesn't even use the word slave in the United States Constitution. Constitutional Republic of Texas says, slaveholders, you will not lose your slaves. There's not going to be limitations on slavery. And it says, this is a quote, Congress shall pass no law to prohibit immigrants from the United States from bringing their slaves into the Republic with them. So you can bring your slaves in here. So if you want to make the case that the Texas Revolution was about slavery, I mean, that's some evidence right there. Also, it says, nor shall Congress have the power to emancipate slaves. No free person of African descent can reside in Texas without the consent of Congress. So basically, it not only says that you can keep your slaves, but you can't even free your slaves. So we're not going to take them from you, but you can't free them yourself unless Congress says so. So there's a fear at the time of slave rebellion being inspired by free blacks, and so here it is in the Constitution saying you can't even free your slaves unless the Texas government says you can. Again, there's going to be certain things that are other things that are different that, as we'll see, will cause problems. Vice president will be elected independent of the president, so you're going to have an election for vice president and election for president. Again, there's going to be the thing about presidents only serving a couple short term. As we'll see, some issues are going to arise about that. But the thing is, when voters go to vote on this Constitution in 1836, everyone will end up approving of it. Well, not everyone, but the significant portion will, mostly because they don't think they're going to be under this thing very long. They're voting at the same time to annex themselves to the United States. Sure, we'll be under this thing for whatever time it takes the U.S. to bring us in. So whatever. It could say, just nonsense, and they'd still vote on it. So Constitutional Republic of Texas will be approved. All right, so that's the second thing they're going to vote on in this 1836 election in September. Another thing they're going to vote on is who will be the members of this government. So who's going to serve as VP? Well, a guy named Mirabeau Lamar will run for VP. He's going to be elected. We'll talk about him shortly. But who's going to be first president of the first official Republic of Texas government? Now, you can say Henry Smith's the first president. You could say maybe even first chair of the Washington on the Brazos Convention. But this is going to be the first democratically elected president of the Republic of Texas. And basically, it's going to come down to three people. We'll see three people who want the job. We've talked about all these three people very, very briefly for this guy. Henry Smith's going to be one of the candidates who will run for executive or president of the Republic of Texas. Sam Houston, the guy that was a hero of the Battle of San Jacinto. A lot of people look at this guy who hadn't lived in Texas for very long, but had helped them achieve their independence against Mexico. A lot of people are going to look to him to be president. And the final person is going to be Stephen F. Austin. So Stephen F. Austin, as we've been talking about, he's been the liaison with the Mexican government. Eventually, he called for independence from Mexico, and a lot of people, are going to view him as most qualified, at least politically, to do this. So we're going to have these three as the main candidates. Well, when the vote is going to be counted, 5,119 votes will go to, or 500,119 votes are going to go to Sam Houston, the hero of San Jacinto. So 5,119. Henry Smith's going to get 743, and then Stephen F. Austin is only going to get 587. So Houston wins significantly. 5,119, 743, 587. So Houston almost gets 10 times the amount of votes as Stephen F. Austin. Why is this going to be the case? Well, part of it is we have this hero of San Jacinto. He's the flavor of the moment. This is just a couple months after the Battle of San Jacinto. A lot of people view Sam Houston as a hero. And as we're going to talk about, they think they're going to get annexed. And this guy, Sam Houston, happens to be friends with American President Andrew Jackson. So maybe he's going to smooth this annexation process. So some people credit Sam Houston overwhelming election because of that. Other people sort of give the easy win by Sam Houston to the fact that Stephen F. Austin, some people view him as waiting too long to endorse independence. Some people view him not as a traitor or anything like that, but they think he worked with Mexico too long. They think that he should have been calling for independence earlier. Now, that's kind of ridiculous. You know, he was just doing what he thought best. You know, he had made an agreement with the Mexican government to bring people in. He didn't think it was fair to, you know, sort of stab the people in the back that invited you in, until he determined that the people of Texas had no other option in 1835, 1836 than do so. But some people are going to look at him critically because of that. He worked with the enemy, and this is going to be especially true of people that are newly arrived to Texas. So a lot of people that have been there for a long time, worked with Stephen F. Austin, knew him, but some of the people voting in this election only gotten there in recent times. Sam Houston, they know him. He's been on the front page. Stephen F. Austin, who's that guy? I don't know him. He didn't help me out. So for this reason, he's not going to do very well. So Stephen F. Austin, as a matter of fact, shortly after the election, Sam Houston will make him his Secretary of State, which is an important position. It's basically the liaison with foreign governments. But Stephen F. Austin won't hold this position for very long because in December 1836, he's going to get pneumonia, age of 43, and he will die. So Stephen F. Austin, the guy who brought all these Americans to Texas, a lot of people say he was saddened by his election defeat, such a significant election defeat, and so but whatever the case, whatever it is, he ends up dying in December 1836. All right, so now we have the Republic of Texas. We have this new Constitution. They've accepted it. Now word is going to be sent to the United States, Washington, D.C. over here. We, the people of Texas, want to become part of the United States. Welcome us in. Well, all right, U.S. is gets the news that the people of this newly acquired area want them to come in. And again, you have this guy who is one of Sam Houston's best friends. This should be easy. Well, Andrew Jackson is not going to immediately even address that the Republic of Texas wants to come into the United States. Doesn't say anything about it. Basically, he's just going to argue or he's not even going to argue about it. He's going to put it to the side because his political partner, this guy Martin Van Buren, his vice president at the time, is running for president. And as we'll talk about, Texas is a controversial issue. So he puts it to the side until this November election. Martin Van Buren will win. But even after that, there's not going to be an immediate bringing up of the debate over Texas. He's going to wait to let Martin Van Buren handle it when he takes over in March 1837. One thing Andrew Jackson will do is right before he leaves office in March 1837 and hands it over to Martin Van Buren, he will recognize Texas's independence and recognize it as an independent country, which means that U.S. can open diplomatic relations with Texas. So U.S. does recognize Texas as an independent country, but annexation and the idea of it's going to be handed to Martin Van Buren. Well, Martin Van Buren knows that now we've recognized Texas as a foreign nation. In order to bring it into the United States, you've got to form a treaty. So you have independent Texas, now you have independent United States. Treaties between two nations in the United States Constitution require 2/3 of the U.S. Senate. So each state gets 2 senators. The senators sit down in a chamber. U.S. wants to make a deal with another country. You need 2/3 of them to agree on this. Martin Van Buren, soon after getting office, he's not going to actually even bring a bill, discussing Texas annexation to the Senate. He's not even bringing an actual treaty. He's just sort of going to float the idea to the U.S. Senate. Is this something that we should consider? Well, he brings this before the U.S. Senate, and what's going to happen is it's going to become immediately clear that any such treaty is not going to get 2/3 of people. So when the idea of Texas starts getting discussed in the Senate, a lot of senators will simply say, no, we don't want Texas. Now, there's a couple reasons for this. One big reason is slavery. So Texas is a slave state. If it's going to come in, there are so many slaves in Texas. The idea that Texas is this haven for slaves, that Stephen F. Austin had talked about. Republic of Texas Constitution talks about these guarantees of slavery. If it comes into the Union, it would be a slave state. Well, at the time, the United States is evenly divided between free and slave states. There's 12 free states, there's 12 slave states in the Union, and if Texas came in, that would add one and possibly even more than that slave states. And actually, some people are going to say it doesn't even have the 60,000 people required to become a state. So we don't know. Maybe we could split this up into multiple different states. And a lot of people in the northern areas are nervous about that because they're starting to get nervous about the spread of slavery. U.S. This issue of slavery had started to go away in the late 1700s as slavery became less profitable, and Southerners, weren't making as much money off of it. But when cotton came around and Southerners started making a lot of money off of it, they started expanding slavery. This made a lot of Northerners nervous, and they're nervous that if you add an additional slave state or multiple different additional slave states, this is going to add additional senators, and this might allow the South to make slavery legal up here. Well, you've had multiple generations at this point who have lived in this free labor system, don't want competition from slave laborers, so they don't want to add Texas because they're afraid this is going to give more power to the slave states and could possibly spread slavery. So that's one reason that the Senate will, a lot of senators are going to be against Texas. Another reason is that in 1836, party politics are incredibly divisive. So Andrew Jackson had taken a lot of power for the executive branch. He had done a lot of things that people in the U.S. objected to. Basically, he had started, I can't get into it too much, but as a president, he started vetoing bills when you're only supposed to veto things that are unconstitutional. He started getting more involved in the Treasury, U.S. banks, and previous presidents, and he'd sort of operated not through the way that a lot of people in Congress felt that the way the president should act. And so what had happened is you saw the formation of two parties, this Democratic Party under Andrew Jackson and this new Whig Party. And this Whig Party, its whole motto was, we don't like Jackson and we're going to oppose him. So a lot of people within this Whig Party are going to look at Texas, they're going to look at the fact that Jackson's friend Sam Houston is down there, and they're going to view this as a way for Jackson to get more power. Jackson, or his buddy now is President Martin Van Buren, and they don't want to add Texas because it's going to add more power to Jackson's camp. A lot of Texans would vote for Democrats or people Jackson supports if Texas gets into the Union. So that's a reason that we're going to see a lot of people in Congress and in the Senate reject the idea of annexing Texas. Another reason is that some people view Texas annexation or the Texas Revolution as immoral. A lot of people view these Texans as, and there's some truth to this, although not a whole heck of a lot of truth, of these Texans as having escaped the United States. A lot of prisoners and stuff, or people that are wanted, had come to Texas to flee, debt they owed in the other state, running away from legal troubles they're having in the eastern states, and had come out here to this Mexican province and basically wrested it from Mexico illegally. A lot of people in the United States say this is wrong. This is represented in this picture, this cartoon from the time. You'll see this sort of guy with almost like a dog-like face. He's meant to represent the average Texan, and you got on his arms things like slavery, rape, fraud. So escaping to Texas because of rape or fraud. Maybe fraud representing what happened to Mexico. Slavery again, murder, somebody running away from murder. And you'll notice that he's sitting on the back of a female slave. So this would be, again, this idea that Texans are responsible for causing all these issues. So some people say morally it's not good to take Texas because it was gained through immoral reasons. Another issue that the United States Senate had a problem with was that if you did annex Texas, you were going to also have to fight Mexico. So Mexico at this point didn't recognize Texas as an independent republic and would probably fight to keep it. Now they're going to have to take the Republic of Texas by itself. Fighting the United States would be difficult for Mexico. If it were in a straight-up fight in a neutral area, then the United States would probably win. But in order to get Mexico to recognize the independence of Texas, and therefore Texas being annexed to the United States, U.S. would have to invade Mexico. Now, that's a different proposition. Actually invading a country, forcing its political leaders to recognize, that this territory is your territory, is a big proposition, difficult proposition. And a lot of American political leaders didn't want to take on, that task. So that's another problem with annexing Texas. Final thing that the Senate's going to be considering is we don't have the time or money to annex Texas, because at the time, 1837, the United States is going through an incredibly horrible financial downturn. It's called this Panic of 1837. Essentially, Andrew Jackson had taken a lot of the U.S. funds out of this national bank. It ended up causing this spiral, this economic downturn, and a lot of people in the United States are out of a job. And so the government, hey, we need to focus on this instead of worrying about Texas. So for all these reasons, Martin Van Buren is never even going to introduce the idea of annexing Texas to the United States. He just looks at the situation, says it's not going to happen, and he pulls off. He doesn't even introduce it to the Senate. So annexing Texas will not be happening anytime soon. So all this means Sam Houston, this guy who everybody thought was going to be president of this Republic of Texas for a couple months, maybe a year, until Texas gets in the United States. Now he's sitting here having to create an independent nation when people thought there wasn't going to be an independent nation for very long. And he's going to have to solve these problems of Texas with just the resources he has on hand. Well, one of the first things Sam Houston has to do is he has to form a functional government. So Texas, the people of Texas had voted on this new Texas Constitution. He's the president, so he needs to work with the legislature to solve these various problems. Well, one of the things that's going to make life difficult for Houston is that the man elected his vice president, Mirabeau Lamar, is going to be disagreeing with him on a number of issues. Basically, Mirabeau Lamar doesn't like Houston. Houston doesn't like Lamar. They have political disagreements. Lamar's actually going to oppose Sam Houston on matters in Indians, matters with debt, things like that. Lamar from Georgia moved out to Texas a little bit before the Revolution. He'd been a lawyer, served in the Georgia State Senate. He lost when he tried to run for the U.S. Senate for Georgia. Basically, he tried to convince the legislature to appoint him the senator for Georgia, but they said no. Came to Texas 1835. Served as under Houston during Texas Revolution. During this time, he's going to be highly critical of Houston for not turning around to fight Santa Anna. And so we're going to see a lot of this criticism carry over when he serves as Houston's VP. Lamar, another thing about him, he's very well educated. He's a poet. It's kind of an interesting thing when you think of Texas. You think of all these rough and tumble characters, and Mirabeau Lamar certainly looks like a rough and tumble character, but he was well known as a poet. All right, so Houston's got to deal with this guy, and he's also got to deal with this newly formed Texas Congress. So another thing about forming this new government is you need an actual place for the government to reside. So initially you'd have the Texas capital, Washington on the Brazos. Then it moved around for a couple months. September 1836, Houston's elected. Well, we need a permanent capital. Well, Houston is going to decide we should make it in this new settlement formed right on the coast called Houston. They named it after Sam Houston, hero of San Jacinto. What better place to have a capital than a place named after me? Now, as we're going to see, guys like Mirabeau Lamar don't like that. They don't like a political opponent, a guy that they don't agree with politically, serving in a capital out of him, named after him. But they also aren't going to like Houston because when Houston is first formed, it's not the Houston that you're going to know later. It's basically muddy, it's swampy, there's mosquitoes everywhere. Being right on the coast, this is something that Spain and Mexico had to deal with. Settlements there generally have disease. You know, it's very hot, humid, mosquitoes everywhere. They still don't know that mosquitoes are the thing that passes disease. So all these swampy conditions, a lot of disease is going to be everywhere, and the Republic of Texas government and the new city of Houston government doesn't have the infrastructure or the money to invest in infrastructure, things like sewage systems, paved roads. So this is just going to be this fetid water, you know, like stagnant pools of water everywhere. You know, add on, you know, these new residents, all the congressmen, people like that showing up. And what you're going to have is, you know, horse feces everywhere and just muddy, just gross land everywhere. It turns into this disease-ridden cesspool, and a lot of people, the congressmen, are going to be miserable having to go here. So you do have this Houston, but it's not a lot of places. It's not a lot of place that a lot of these congressmen want to go to. So do have a capital, but not a very good capital. Next problem that Houston's going to have to deal with is debt. Now, this is going to be something that Lamar and Houston are going to heavily disagree on. So the Republic of Texas, coming out of the revolution, $1.25 million in debt. You know, as we mentioned before, having to pay soldiers, having to buy guns from Americans, things like that. It's a huge problem, and it's going to be a problem that, as we'll see, the Republic of Texas is going to continue to face throughout its lifetime. Well, some people will propose the way to get out of debt is to invade Mexico and take stuff from them. This is actually something Mirabeau Lamar will propose. So Mexico's not recognizing your independence, well, and claiming you're still at war, you're a rebellious province. Well, why don't we, you know, essentially invade them, take their stuff? You have Lamar propose this. You're going to have members of the Republic of Texas Army, which is still around in case Mexico invades again. They like this idea as well, and so you know, hey, let's just go and take stuff from them. You know, there's all these silver mines just to the south of Texas. If we can, you know, get down there, you know, maybe take Mexico has a treasury in Saltillo. We can pay off our debt very easily. Well, Houston's looking at this. This could be a disaster. What if we go down there, our army's destroyed, it leaves the Republic of Texas defenseless? Or what if we're over here trying to get diplomatic recognition from Britain and France? So we got it from the United States, but we need it from Britain and France. They're going to look at this and say, you guys are, you know, attacking Mexico. This isn't what independent nations do. This is going to look poor on the international stage. So Houston doesn't want this to happen. He thinks it's dangerous, it's reckless. But Lamar, a lot of congressmen are on board with it. A lot of members of the Army are going to be on board with it. So what Houston's going to have to do is basically furlough the Army. He basically puts the Army on temporary leave. He's going to fire a lot of the Army, which will end up, you know, relieving the debt somewhat if you don't have to pay as much of the Army, and gets rid of actually most of the Army. He's going to keep just a handful of people, and he's going to rehire people that are calmer, more loyal to him to keep them from invading Mexico. Okay, so this is going to be, you know, one proposal, but Houston pushes back and lays off most of the Army. Another thing that Houston will do is to take care of this debt problem is he's going to start cutting the budget. So during the Texas Revolution, you can read about this if you want, but there had been a couple of people proposing this Texas Navy. You could kind of say some of these ships that are owned by private individuals claimed they were the Texas Navy. But there had been calls to build these Texas naval ships, and some ships had begun construction, and you know, even those private individuals had begun fighting. But there were some currently getting repairs, some getting under construction. Houston's going to say, we don't really need these things. Cancel the shipment for the Texas Navy. Now we'll see in a little bit here. Lamar is going to uncancel a lot of these cancellation orders, but basically says we don't need these ships anymore. They're currently under construction in the United States, private builder there. No, we don't want these things anymore. Cancels construction of the Navy. We don't need this Navy. So, all right, well, you're cutting the budget, you're cutting the Army. That's cutting things, but it's not adding funds to the Texas budget. How are we going to do that? Well, what Sam Houston's going to decide is that we need a tax. Now, Here in Texas, in modern times, the general perception, government, no taxes, things like that. We're going to talk about later on why the feelings of Texas is these sort of anti-government, anti-tax feelings are there. But that doesn't come from the Republic of Texas time period. As a matter of fact, right when the Republic of Texas government is going to form, they're going to immediately implement a property tax. And this is going to be a property tax on just about everything. So Republic of Texas government will start sending out these tax collectors. What they'll do is they'll show up to individual plantations, homes, private farms, things like that. And they're simply going to count, what do you have? Well, this will include land. This will include slaves. This will include things like pocket watches, carriages, just about everything that you own. This tax collector will count it up, assign a value to it, and then say, we want a percentage of all this. So Houston will send these guys out, and it's really interesting because they continue to do this even after the Republic of Texas period. When you get Texas as a state, they still collect taxes this way. Even today, property tax is a big deal in Texas. But what these guys do is they're going to go out, find these individuals, count up their acreage. So this guy right here, can't read his name, looks like Ransom or something. They have 3,000 acres, it appears, value of $1,000. And then you look here, he's got 6 horses worth 150. Cattle looks 188 or something for $565. You look at this next guy, he has 2 Negroes. This would be indicating slaves. This is going to be a big source of revenue for the Republic of Texas. You take the value of human beings and you assign a value to these humans, and then you're going to tax them for that. As a matter of fact, the 2 biggest things the Republic of Texas will collect taxes on are land and slaves. And you'll see miscellaneous property over here. Some just says miscellaneous right there. Yeah, miscellaneous. But sometimes you'll see things in this like, again, pocket watches, carriages, musical instruments, stuff like that. And so they are going to collect taxes on just about all this stuff. So this idea that Texas was this tax-free haven, absolutely not true. They needed money. We're in debt. We got to get money somehow, so we're going to collect this property tax. Another thing that the Republic of Texas government will start doing is issuing paper money. And you can still get your hands on this stuff fairly easily today. But what they would do is, back in the 1700s, 1800s, generally all money was backed by hard currency, or most of the time it was made of hard currency. The idea of paper money wasn't unknown, but it was uncommon. So during the United States, a lot of times what they would do is simply use Spanish coins. There was so much silver coming out of New Spain that they would just use Spanish coins as currency. Eventually, the United States starts making its own currency, but it would be made out of gold or silver, stuff that, finite amount of it in the world. People have assigned value to gold and silver, and so if you get a United States stamp dollar, it says this is X, ounces of gold, and it's worth this value. Paper is just paper. Paper is essentially worthless. Some governments have started issuing paper money, but the paper money would be redeemable for hard currency. Well, what the Republic of Texas is going to do, it had a little bit of hard currency, but it's going to start issuing paper money far in excess of what they actually have in hard currency. Now, Sam Houston's going to only do this to a small amount. So you have people that you owe a lot of money to. I borrowed 50 gold pieces from this financer in the United States to buy guns for the army. Well, instead of paying back 50 gold pieces in gold and giving interest, you give them 50 Republic of Texas dollars. Hypothetically, this would be redeemed by gold, but as we're going to talk about, the Republic of Texas is going to print more than they actually have in gold, which will be a problem when people start realizing it. The value of the dollars, the Republic of Texas dollars, is going to go down. So this is another way that Sam Houston's going to get money, is simply just print out money, say it's worth more than it actually is. But probably the biggest way we're going to see during the Republic of Texas to make money is selling land. So Texas had essentially gained all of this area and disputed. We're going to talk about this. Mexican government doesn't recognize the independence of Texas. They certainly don't recognize Texas to this area that had never been part of Texas under Spain or Mexico. But Republic of Texas claims all this region, and Mexico, at least under Santa Anna and the Treaty of Velasco, had signed over all this land to Texas. So now you have all this land, and what we'll see the Republic of Texas do is, as long as the land had not been handed out by a colonizer, they're going to actually honor old Mexican and Spanish land grants. But if you have a lot of land that nobody lived on, so that now belongs to the Republic of Texas, what they'll start doing is selling this to Americans coming in. So if you're a poor farmer over here, let's say you want to grow cotton, something like that, you could buy land in, say, Arkansas. I'm making this number up. It costs $2 an acre. You come over here to the Republic of Texas. Republic of Texas government will sell it to you for 40 cents an acre, something like that. So just start selling off land, which is going to be very helped by the fact that in 1837 you have this financial crisis. A lot of people lose their fortunes here, want to remake themselves, so they come to Republic of Texas. So this will slowly start to pay off the debt under Sam Houston. As we're going to talk about very quickly, the debt will go back up shortly after Houston's out of office, but Houston starts to pay it off. So he's dealing with this problem in sort of a kind of responsible way. All right, well, what about Indians? What about these American Indian groups that had been causing problems for the Republic of Texas, or even before that, Mexico or Spain? Biggest one we've talked about are the Comanches. How are you going to deal with these guys? Well, Houston's going to have a very somewhat simple solution, I guess. Basically, Comanches, just know they're going to start attacking these Texas settlements. They step up their attacks during the Texas Revolution. In the time period after they realize, hey, there's a lot of chaos going on here. For example, you're going to get in May 1836, 500 Comanches attacking a settlement called Fort Parker, taking a couple captives, including this young woman named Cynthia Ann Parker. We'll talk about her a little bit later. But you have these Comanche raids. How is Houston going to deal with this? Well, Houston's solution is simply to, here be a image of Fort Parker. Here's Cynthia Ann Parker here. We'll talk about her again later. You have all these other Indian groups. But Houston's solution to dealing with the Comanches is simply to send out peace emissaries to them and say, you guys stick to your area over here, and we're going to stick to our area over here. And he's going to be trying to make a peace agreement with the Comanches. As we're going to talk about, the Texas legislature doesn't like this idea, because what Sam Houston wants to propose is that basically from this point forward, the Comanches, if they stay on their side of it, which means they can have all the plains area they want, even attack Mexican settlements over here. Houston will look the other way, but they just don't come over here in this direction where American settlers are. Now, Houston, he had early in his life lived with the Cherokee Indians. He had fought Andrew Jackson during this Indian removal, which we'll talk about in just a little bit here. Very friendly, very forward-thinking policy towards Indians. And so Comanches, even this group that has this pretty bad reputation, that has attacked these settlers and who has kidnapped some, including Cynthia Ann Parker, Houston basically says, we'll respect your right to this land if you respect ours. So as we're going to talk about, a lot of the Texas legislature doesn't like this idea because they don't have as sort of enlightened idea about Indians as Houston does. And then also, if you tell them they can have this area to the west, which, although it's not very good for growing cotton and things and stuff like that, you could eventually sell this. So we'll see Houston start making peace overtures to the Comanches, but during his time as president, he's not going to get a final peace treaty done with them just yet. It's going to be sort of a sending out emissaries and talking about this proposed line. So this is going to be one Indian group that Houston's going to deal with. It's not the only Indian group. What we have is we're also going to have actually issues with the Wichitas. So we've talked about the Wichitas. We haven't talked about them for a while, but a lot of times they ally with the Comanches. They're sort of this Plains Indian group that resembles the Caddos somewhat, and that they lived in these beehive-style homes They will be sedentary sometimes, growing fields of corn, things like that. Well, what you see during the 1830s is actually some of these Caddos. So the Caddos have been here in East Texas, in Louisiana. Well, even back in Spanish times, some of the Caddos, the ones in Louisiana, were growing upset because Americans were moving into their territory. Now the Caddos in Louisiana, the ones remaining here and the ones remaining over here in East Texas, they're starting to get inundated with Americans or Texans coming into their land, trading with them, trading alcohol with them, getting into land disputes with Americans wanting to buy their land, but no, this is our traditional hunting ground, things like that. Well, some Caddos had determined we simply can't stay here because of this encroachment. We don't know how to deal with these guys. And some had actually moved out to where the Wichitas, again, more nomadic, but they're linguistically similar to the Caddos. And so some of the Caddos had essentially dropped their sedentary agriculturalist ways to adopt these more nomadic ways of the Wichitas. So you saw some Caddos there. Now we're going to have a handful of Caddos stay back here. And Houston wanted to treat them friendly, but some had just moved west, and a handful had started joining the Wichitas, even in raiding these Texas settlers. Again, we're going to talk about Houston having to deal with them. Houston's also going to have to deal with some American Indian tribes coming west from the United States. We'll talk about some of these groups later, groups like the Delawares, things like that. Some had started moving in to join that small group of Cherokees that had showed up at the end of the Spanish period, been there during the Mexican period, and sort of in this region. You started to see some other East Texas, groups from the eastern part of the United States move in over here, and this Indian Removal Act, we'll talk more about that in a little bit here, is going to increase the number of these other Indians up there. Well, Houston had lived with the Cherokees for a long time, and these other groups, a lot of them are Mississippi culture Indians as well. He basically is going to say to these groups, you guys stick to your land, you continue to be sedentary agriculturalists, and I'll protect you, and I'm going to get you title to your land. So part of this is because Houston cares about Indians, but part of it is if you want to remove these guys, that's going to require paying Texas Rangers, sending the army out there, which all of that requires money, and Houston's very much in debt. As a matter of fact, with the Cherokees, Houston's actually friends with their chief, this guy Chief Bull, and he'd spoken with him before. Actually, let's go ahead and talk about this now. So during beginning in 1830, Andrew Jackson had pushed for this Indian removal, and what you're going to have is this group of Cherokees had moved out here prior to Indian removal during the Spanish period. But what you see after Indian removal in 1830 is a lot of these Mississippi culture groups, and these Mississippi culture groups had lived out in this area since before Europeans had arrived. Again, a lot of them had adapted to European ways, started wearing European-style clothing, living in European-style houses, and had generally gotten along well with people from the United States because they knew how to deal with them. They'd intermarried with a lot of these groups. Well, 1830, Andrew Jackson, very different than Sam Houston. Sam Houston can view a biracial society where Indians and whites live together. Andrew Jackson wasn't that way. He didn't believe that Indians were capable of the same thing whites were. And even though Mississippi culture Indians had owned this land for a long time and were generally peaceful towards people from the United States, Andrew Jackson is going to want to remove them or trade them land in the east for land in Oklahoma away from whites. Well, a lot of these Indians will accept this, like the Choctaw are one of the first to accept this. They move out here, accept this land in eastern Oklahoma, actually get some pretty good land in eastern Oklahoma. Other groups try to not fight the United States, but just try to argue against this in court, but eventually they're going to be forcefully removed west. Creek, Chickasaw, initially they try to resist, but they're going to accept and move out themselves. Cherokee try to fight in court. They're going to refuse to leave their land, and the United States will remove them on this Trail of Tears. That's what's depicted here. So you have this Indian territory just to the north. This is full of a lot of Indians that had been removed from the eastern part of the United States. And so this is kind of a weird situation that you have some of these Indians that arrived before into Texas, and you have this Indian territory up here. As we're going to see in a little bit, some Indians will start raiding down here in Texas, and then they'll start retreating up to this Indian territory. Some people in Texas will start saying the United States removed its Indians to this Indian territory. We should remove these groups like the Caddos who have land in East Texas that's nice out here. We should move them up there. Some people are going to point to the Cherokees and say, hey, these guys live on some of this good land over here. Why don't we move them up there with the Cherokees from the United States and moved? They're being forcefully moved to this Indian territory at this moment. So some people are looking at these Indians here and saying, let's move our Indians just like the United States did. But Sam Houston, again, being fairly friendly disposed towards Indians, is going to refuse to do that. So this is, and especially some people are going to point to the Cherokees and say, hey, these guys were, some of them had begun to complain that the Republic of Texas had refused to recognize their land title. So if you remember, there was this group of Cherokees that had almost joined with the Fredonian Rebellion because Mexico had never recognized their land title. Well, the Republic of Texas, Houston wants to recognize the Cherokees' land title, but the Republic of Texas government is refusing to do that. So there's a group of Cherokees that even talk about rebelling and joining Mexico to get this land title from Mexico, which almost doesn't make sense because why would you fight against the Republic of Texas when Mexico wouldn't recognize your land title either? And Sam Houston's talking about it, but Sam Houston, again, he's talking about it. He can't really get it done. So one of the people that is pushing for this is actually going to be Cherokee that Sam Houston knows, a guy named Chief Bull. Guy, I think his other name is Richard Fields. You'll sometimes see him called by. He says, if we don't get our land title from the Republic of Texas, maybe we'll join with Mexico and help Mexico get Texas back. So Houston's got this weird situation on his hands. He tries to get this peace treaty with the Cherokees, get them their land title recognized, but the Republic of Texas refuses to do that. And then he's got this issue dealing with these Indian territory up here. So this is all going to lead to an additional problem that Houston will face during his first term, and this is going to happen in 1838. So 1838, up to this point, Mexico has been busy dealing with internal fighting. Santa Anna, after he returned, after losing Texas, he gets thrown out of office. There's going to be internal fighting because of that, and as we're going to be talking about, there's going to be threats of Spanish invasion, although I should take that back. Spain just recognized their independence, but French invasion. We'll talk about this very shortly. But there's a lot of internal disputes down here in Mexico. But 1838, there's a lull in this internal fighting, and what we'll have is some Mexican leaders are going to basically send spies, I guess you would call them, up to speak with some of the remaining Tejanos in this area. So there's a handful of Tejanos that have returned to Nacogdoches during the Mexican period, and a lot of these guys had seen Americans come in, using language barriers. You speak Spanish, they speak English. Use this to sort of divest some Mexicans of their land. Post 1836 in the Texas Revolution, a lot of Mexicans had been treated poorly by the incoming Americans, and so you have this Tejano discontent. Obviously, you have a Tejano discontent here in San Antonio as well, but it was even worse here in Nacogdoches. Well, there is a Tejano here in East Texas named Vicente Cordova, and these Mexican officials or spies or whoever you want to call them are going to basically come up to Nacogdoches. They'll meet with Cordova, and they're going to talk to him about potentially rebelling against the Republic of Texas, with the idea being that if you start this internal dispute here, this will cause chaos. The Republic of Texas government will have to respond to it, and then as they're dealing with this, Mexico will invade down here and then retake Texas. So basically they contact this Tejano and Vicente Cordova and tell him to begin this rebellion. And they actually told Cordova that maybe you should contact those Cherokees, this Chief Bull, who is being upset with the Republic of Texas government because they won't approve Sam Houston's treaty. Maybe they can join you in your rebellion. Maybe you can even contact the Caddos, who are starting to get upset. Maybe we can bring all these disaffected groups together, start this East Texas rebellion, and then you'll be joined by Mexico. Well, word is going to get out before this Cordova rebellion can be put into effect. As a matter of fact, Cordova is going to be sending emissaries out to meet with the Cherokees before, as word gets out what's about to happen. Well, what Houston is going to do is, reaction to this, send a letter saying all lawless interactions will cease, and then he orders a Nacogdoches militia called up to put down the rebellion, and he's going to send this militia out to attack Cordova's forces before they can reach the Cherokees. You almost can think about it as Houston doesn't even want to get the Cherokees the option because they don't want to get themselves in trouble. This is a sort of a short battle. This militia made up of these American Texans will engage Cordova in sort of this very quick, inconclusive battle. Cordova's forces are going to be dispersed before they can reach the Cherokees. Well, this is going to get a lot of people scared. Are we having this Tejano Indian rebellion out here in East Texas? Well, Houston, again being Houston, he's going to order that do not punish any Tejanos that you can't conclusively prove that were part of this. You cannot use this as an excuse to throw them off their land. And he's going to say that don't distrust Tejanos and Indians just because of this Cordova rebellion. So Sam Houston can say these various things. So this would be Cordova rebellion. Houston could say these things, but if you have a group, and again, Cordova rebellion, even today, I don't think we know how many people actually were willing participants in it or just were accused of being participants in it. But if you have this minority group within your population that is talking about rebellion, and you're going to get a lot of people basically thinking this is all Tejanos, and a lot of people are going to be talking about, maybe we should get rid of Tejanos, these people in East Texas that are causing this rebellion. So Houston's going to basically have to deal with rebellious Tejanos, but he's also going to have to deal with Americans saying, don't attack non-rebellious Tejanos. It's a very thin line Houston has to walk, keeping the majority Texans from harming that minority, but also keeping the minority from rebelling. And then he also has to keep the American Texans from attacking the Indians who hadn't even been informed of the Cordova rebellion. Well, Houston's got to deal with all this, but he also has to deal with the fact that even though this Cordova rebellion didn't even really get off its feet, you did have Mexican officials contacting people within the Republic of Texas. That part was true. And so, officials learn that yes, indeed, Mexico was conspiring with these East Texas Tejanos for this rebellion and talking about a potential invasion. Was this invasion real? Well, it's true that people are actually talking, but the invasion is not going to end up happening. Now, whether or not Mexico could have carried out an invasion in 1838, is a question in itself. But if they could have in 1838, by the end of 1838, they're not going to be able to, because in 1838, Mexico will once again be involved in a war. This is going to be a war with France. So, in Mexico City, Veracruz, a French baker had basically had his pastry shop ruined by a riot. Mob to destroy his pastry shop. he petitions the Mexican government to give him his funds. So it was just a French citizen who had moved to Texas, set up this pastry shop. A mob had attacked, destroyed a shop. Basically says to the Mexican government, you need to pay for this. Mexican government refuses to do so. So the French baker is going to petition the French government to get Mexico to recognize or get him to pay for his bakery. France is also upset with Mexico because of some debt that Mexico owes France. People in Mexico had borrowed money from France. France wants it back. So what France is going to do is it's going to blockade all Mexican ports. Main Mexican port of Veracruz, a couple other ports had opened since gaining independence from Spain. But basically they blockade Mexico. They take over this island right off the coast of Veracruz, and they're going to start firing on ships that that Mexico tries to get past their blockade. And French Navy is one of the best navies in the world, so Mexico can't get across it. There will be a handful of land battles where France occupies these ports. Santa Anna is actually going to get back into power because during this would be a depiction of the Pastry War. So you have these French ships. I believe this is the San Juan de Ulua, right off the coast of Veracruz. There's a battle here as the Mexican army's trying to keep control of this island. The French blockade, try to take over this fort. Santa Anna is actually going to get back in power because he'll be engaged. He'll return to Mexico after being exiled for losing Texas and signing the Treaty of Velasco. He says, I can come back, defend you from France. Gets in this a fight with the French out on this island outside of Veracruz. He actually gets his leg shot off with a cannonball during the fight. And eventually the French will leave. This is going to allow Santa Anna to be back in power. Hey, I lost my leg for Mexico. And so he's going to return to power. But thankfully for Texas, this distracts Mexico from the Republic of Texas. It's actually kind of interesting. During this pastry war, Mexico ends up getting stuff it needs through the Republic of Texas. It's a really weird situation. So France won't let Mexico get any goods from down here. So we need firearms, we need ammunition. Well, some Texans will start shipping this stuff into Texas and then trading it down into Mexico. This is going to make Sam Houston, the Republic of Texas, look bad because France is saying, hey, you're undermining our efforts. We want to get if you want us to recognize you, don't do this. And so, yeah, these Texans wanting to make money, but then Houston's looking, hey, you're providing arms and ammunition to people that, could potentially fight us. And then we're also at the same time trying to become buddies with France, and you're sort of undermining that effort by trading with Mexico. So he's going to end up having to cut off trade with Mexico. He's going to basically have to make it illegal and start sending what little army is available to cut off this trade down here. So basically you have this being an issue, and this is going to be another huge issue for Sam Houston, is just recognition. You've got the United States, but Britain, France, they still refuse to recognize. Britain, by the way, one of the things they're holding out is that they're saying to Houston, we don't like slavery. As a matter of fact, Britain has become this abolitionist nation, and Britain would love Texas cotton. Britain has this huge textile industry, and they've been getting most of their textiles from the southern United States, but this comes with heavy duties that the United States forces their merchants to pay as they're leaving for Britain. So by the time the cotton gets over to Britain, it's very expensive. But if you could get this Republic of Texas to start sending you cotton, maybe lower duties on cotton to Britain, boy, we would like to get this stuff from here instead of the United States. And the other thing that the British are going to object to in this United States is the use of slavery. So Britain teases the idea of recognizing the Republic of Texas, but they want Sam Houston to basically say to them, we're going to get rid of slavery. Now, Sam Houston wants British recognition, but he knows the people of Texas, especially those in power, are very beholden to their slaves. So it's this weird situation where he doesn't think he's going to get British recognition, at least immediately, because of the slavery issue. So All of this is going to characterize Houston's first term as president. Debt issues, Indian issues, trying to make peace with Indians, Cordova Rebellion, and he doesn't get he gets U.S. recognition, doesn't get French recognition yet, certainly doesn't get Mexico to recognize its independence, doesn't get British recognition. Houston first term is unsuccessful. I mean, he still has popularity, especially from the Battle of San Jacinto, but a lot of people within Texas are looking at his methods and basically saying these things don't work. We need somebody else, a different way to go about these things. And so you're going to see a lot of people in Texas looking for an alternative to Houston's leadership. And they're going to get it because, as the Republic of Texas Constitution states, first president only serves for 2 years. After this is 3 years, but 2 years, Sam Houston, you can't serve after this, and you cannot run for the next presidency. So Houston's going to have to step down, and as we'll talk about next time, this is going to open the door for a new person to become president of the Republic of Texas.